Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time to a world where the clang of swords and the thunder of siege engines were just part of everyday life. Picture this: you're standing on a windswept hill, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. Below you, a river snakes lazily through the valley, but your eyes are drawn upward to the hulking mass of stone perched on the cresta medieval castle, its walls rising like the jagged teeth of some ancient beast. The sun dips low, casting long shadows that stretch across the land, and for a moment you can almost hear the distant cries of soldiers and the creak of drawbridges. This is a place built not for comfort, but for survival. A fortress where every stone, every tower, every narrow window has a purpose to keep you alive when the world outside turns hostile. And trust me, in the Middle Ages, hostility was never far away. If you were caught outside those walls during an attack, well, let's just say your survival odds would be slimmer than a castle's arrow slit. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and local time. It's always cool to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're about to enter a world where chaos was the norm, and the only thing standing between you and oblivion was a pile of carefully arranged rocks. Okay? Maybe that's a bit dramatic, but medieval castles were essentially the panic rooms of their time. Except instead of hiding from a home invader, you were hiding from entire armies, marauding bandits, or your neighbor who decided your land looked better than his. These weren't the fairy tale castles with turrets and princesses waving from balconies. No, these were gritty, no-nonsense fortresses designed to withstand everything from flaming arrows to battering rams, to the occasional bored noble with a catapult and too much time on his hands. But let's rewind a bit. Why did castles even exist in the first place? Well, imagine Europe in the early Middle Ages, say, around the 9th or 10th century. It's a mess. The Roman Empire's long gone, and in its place, you've got a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and baronies, all squabbling over land power and who gets to call themselves king this week. Viking raids are a regular Tuesday, and don't even get me started on the Magyars or the Saracens. In short, it's a rough neighborhood, and you need a way to protect yourself, your family, and your shiny new title of Lord Whatever. Enter the castle. But not the stone behemoths you're thinking of, at least not yet. The earliest castles were actually made of wood and earth, often just a simple Motte and Bailey design. Picture a big mound of dirt, the motte with a wooden tower on top, surrounded by a fenced-in area, the Bailey, where people lived and worked. It wasn't fancy, but it got the job done. You could spot enemies from the tower, and if things got dicey, you'd retreat to the motte and hope the attackers got bored before your food ran out. But here's the thing: wood burns. And in a world where siege warfare often meant set everything on fire and see what happens, that was a problem. So around the 10th century, as Viking raids and local feuds became more frequent, people started thinking, hey, maybe we should build these things out of something a bit more fireproof. And thus the stone castle was born. The first stone castles were simple, keeps essentially big square towers where you could store supplies, house troops, and make a last stand if things went south. But as warfare evolved, so did the castles. Walls got thicker, towers got taller, and suddenly you had these sprawling complexes with multiple layers of defense, each one designed to make an attacker's life as miserable as possible. You see, the shift from wood to stone wasn't just a medieval glow up, it was a necessity. Those early Mott and Bailey setups were scrappy little survivors, but they had their limits. Imagine you're holed up in one, peering out from your wooden tower as a band of raiders rolls up with torches and a bad attitude. The fence around your bailey might hold them off for a minute, but once the flames start licking at the timber, it's game over. Your best defense is basically kindling, and your escape plan is hoping the enemy trips over the moat on their way in. Not exactly a winning strategy. So as the threats got bigger, Vikings rival lords, you name it, people realized they needed something sturdier, something that didn't turn into a bonfire at the first sign of trouble. That's where stone comes in, slow and steady, like the tortoise in that old fable, except this tortoise could crush you if you got too close. By the late 10th century, stone castles started popping up across Europe, and they were a game changer. The mainstream fact here is pretty clear. These early stone keeps were built to counter Viking raids that had been terrorizing the continent for decades. Wood couldn't stop a determined Norseman with an axe and a grudge, but a thick stone wall. That's a different story. Suddenly, you had a fortress that could shrug off fire, stand firm against battering rams, and give you a fighting chance to outlast the enemy. But it wasn't just about toughness. There was some serious ingenuity baked into these designs. Let's talk about the little quirks that made castles more than just big piles of rock. For instance, some castles came with secret passages, narrow twisting tunnels carved into the walls or under the floors. These weren't just for dramatic escapes, though that was definitely a perk. They could be used to stash gold sneak supplies in during a siege, or even hide someone you didn't want the enemy to find. Picture a lord whispering to his steward, "Quick, shove the treasure in the wall," and maybe Aunt Gertrude, too, she's been complaining about the siege rations again. It's a quirky little detail, but it shows how every corner of a castle was built with survival in mind. Now, as you're drifting into this stone-clad world, let's linger on those walls for a moment. They weren't just there to look imposing, though they did that pretty well. They were your shield, your lifeline, the only thing keeping the chaos at bay. Picture yourself running your hand along the cold, rough surface, feeling the weight of centuries pressed into every block. Up above, the wind howls past the battlements, carrying the faint twang of bowstrings as archers take their positions. Down below, the moat glimmers darkly, a silent promise to anyone foolish enough to try crossing it. Every inch of this place was designed to protect you, to give you a fighting chance when the world turned upside down. And speaking of that world, let's not forget the bigger picture. Castles didn't just spring up overnight. They evolved alongside the threats they faced. As siege tactics got nastier, think trebuchets, hurling boulders, or sappers tunneling under your walls, castle builders had to get creative. They added layers literally and figuratively. You'd get concentric castles with multiple rings of walls, each one a new nightmare for attackers. Breach the outer wall. Congratulations, you're now stuck in a courtyard with arrows raining down from the inner towers. It's like a medieval video game level, except there's no respawn button, and the snacks are probably stale bread and questionable water. But here's where it gets juicy and maybe a little sleepy as we ease into the next bit. Historians still love to bicker over this one. Were castles really about defense? Or were they just flexing for the neighbors? Some say it was all about survival. Stone walls were the only way to keep your head attached to your shoulders in a lawless age. Others argue it was a power play, a way to scream, "I've got the cash and the clout to build this monstrosity, so don't even think about crossing me." Honestly, it's probably a bit of both. Building a castle was so absurdly expensive that it doubled as a status symbol. Kind of like buying a sports car today, except your sports car has a drawbridge and a dungeon. So as we glide from this introduction into the meatier details ahead, imagine yourself slipping through one of those secret passages, torch in hand, the flicker of light dancing on the damp stone. You're leaving the broad strokes behind and stepping into the nitty-gritty, where we'll uncover the tricks and traps that turn castles into legends. Think murder holes dripping with boiling oil gatehouses that could chew up an army and towers so tall they seem to scrape the sky. It's all coming up next, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. The story's just getting good, and the best part, you're already halfway there, cozy and safe, with nothing but the hum of your fan to remind you of the present. You step out of the narrow passage, blinking in the sudden light. The air wraps around you thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. Around you, the bailey hums with life servants, scurry with baskets of grain. A blacksmith's hammer rings out like a heartbeat, and a gaggle of children chase a squealing piglet through the mud. Above it all, the wooden palisade looms, its sharpened stakes jutting skyward like the jagged grin of some ancient beast. Welcome to a Mott and Bailey castle, the scrappy little survivor of early medieval Europe. It's your home, your refuge, but let's be real, it's not exactly a fortress of dreams. These early castles weren't built for comfort. They were born from a desperate need to stay alive in a world where power was a game of tug-of-war, and the rope was usually on fire. Picture it, a raised mound of earth, the motta crowned with a wooden tower surrounded by a fenced yard, the bailey where daily life stumbles along. It's like the medieval version of a panic room, except you're not hiding from a burglary, you're dodging entire armies. Run your hand along the palisade's rough timber, feel the splinters snag your skin, the faint tremble as the wind sneaks through the gaps. It's sturdy enough, sure, but those scorch marks from past raids, the patched up sections where the wood's been bashed in, they whisper a truth you can't ignore. This place is one flaming arrow away from being a giant tinderbox. In a land of constant sieges, survival's a daily hustle. Every time you climb the motte, peering out at the horizon, you're counting the odds. Vikings on the coast, rival barons eyeing your fields, your castle's a target in wood, just doesn't cut it against a determined foe. It's like building a fort out of couch cushions in your living room. Great for a laugh, but when the real trouble shows up, you're wishing for something sturdier. So what's a medieval lord to do? You can't keep patching up your palisade forever. That's where the slow, steady shift to stone creeps in like a deep breath after a long sprint. It wasn't instant, more like a grudging realization that wood was a temporary fix in a world getting nastier by the day. The big push came in 1066 when William the Conqueror stormed into England with the Norman conquest. These guys were castle-building wizards, and they littered the countryside with motte and bailey forts to lock down their new turf. But even they knew wood wouldn't last. Within decades, those rickety setups were getting a stone makeover, a trend that swept Europe faster than gossip in a village tavern. Why stone? Well, it's simple, really. Stone doesn't burst into flames when some yahoo lobs a torch over your walls. Imagine drifting off to sleep, knowing your whole home could turn into a bonfire with one lucky shot. Not exactly a lullaby, right? Stone laughs off, fire shrugs at rot, and doesn't blink when a battering ram comes knocking. It's the upgrade from a cardboard box fort to a treehouse with a "No Vikings" allowed sign, except this treehouse could stop a charging horse dead in its tracks. But it's more than just toughness. Warfare was evolving, and wooden walls couldn't keep up. Catapults and trebuchets, those medieval wrecking balls, could turn a timber palisade into kindling with a single hit. Stone takes the punch and keeps standing, daring the enemy to try again. It's the difference between a paper bag and a suit of armor owns, a joke the others, a lifeline. Before stone took over, though people got creative with their wooden castles, one quirky trick, slapping animal hides or soaked blankets over the timber to fend off fire. Imagine your castle decked out in cow skins like it's auditioning for the world's weirdest fashion show. It wasn't perfect, determined attackers could still spark a blaze, but it might buy you enough time to dump a bucket of water or fire back with your own arrows. Another move was piling earthworks under the palisade using dirt as a firebreak. It's like setting your campfire on rock. Sure, it might still catch, but it won't spread as fast. Desperate times, desperate measures, right? And here's where the historians start squabbling, because of course they do. Were these castles all about defense, or was there something else going on? Some say stone was pure survival, a shield against a brutal world. Others argue it was a power play, a way to flex your wealth and control. Picture a lord with a stone castle smirking down at his neighbors like good luck storming this peasant's. Scholars still debate. It was the point to stay safe or to scream, untouchable to anyone within eyeshot. Maybe it's both practicality wrapped in a big rocky ego trip. As the sun dips low, painting the bailey in golden streaks, you feel the weight of it all sinking in. These wooden walls, creaking and scarred, are a fading echo of a wilder time. But change is rumbling on the horizon. Whispers float through the air, new castles, not of timber, but of stone rising like giants across the land. You can almost see them, towering, unyielding, built to outlast the chaos. And that's where the real magic happens, because if stone was the game changer, the walls of these castles were the stars of the show. Thick, bristling with tricks, and ready to ruin any attacker's day, they're the first line of defense, and trust me, they've got stories to tell. So linger here a moment in the fading glow of this wooden world, then follow me to the next chapter where those walls take center stage. As you approach the base of the castle wall, your journey doesn't end there, it's only just begun. Before you can even think about scaling those towering stone defenses, you're met with a moat, a wide, often murky stretch of water encircling the castle. Picture it, a glistening barrier reflecting the castle's imposing silhouette with the faint ripple of movement hinting at unseen dangers below. Moats weren't just decorative. They were a critical piece of the defensive puzzle. Moats could be natural, formed by rivers or lakes, or man-made, dug out by laborers and filled with water diverted from nearby sources. Some were shallow, a mere annoyance to wade through, while others plunged deep enough to drown an armored knight. And let's not forget the rumors. Some moats were stocked with fish eels, or even crocodiles, though the latter's more legend than fact in most European castles. The point was simple. Crossing a moat was a logistical nightmare. Attackers had to build makeshift bridges, or fill it with debris all while under fire from the defenders above. The psychological effect was just as potent. A moat turned the castle into an island, amplifying its aura of invincibility. Imagine standing on the far side, soaked and shivering, staring across at the walls that now seemed twice as tall. It was a demoralizing start to any siege. The drawbridge, a movable gateway. If you somehow made it past the moat, your next challenge was the drawbridge, wooden or metal platform that could be raised or lowered at the defender's whim. In peacetime, it lay flat, welcoming allies and supplies. But when trouble loomed, it was hauled up with chains or counterweights, sealing the castle shut like a giant clamshell. Suddenly, that inviting entrance became an impenetrable wall. The drawbridge was a marvel of medieval mechanics. Some were simple planks, while others were massive structures reinforced with iron. The counterweight system, often a heavy stone or wooden beam, allowed a handful of defenders to lift it quickly even under pressure, and if attackers got too close, they'd find themselves stranded on the wrong side, staring up at a sheer drop or a portcullis slamming down to finish the job. Here's a fun twist. Some drawbridges were designed to trap invaders. Imagine charging across only to have it collapse under your weight, or tilt unexpectedly, dumping you into the moat. It was a cruel but effective trick, turning the attacker's momentum against them. The gatehouse, the castle's front door. Beyond the drawbridge lies the gatehouse, the castle's heavily fortified entrance, and often its most vulnerable point. This wasn't just a door. It was a miniature fortress, packed with defenses. Picture a tunnel-like structure flanked by towers bristling with arrow slits and murder holes, openings in the ceiling where defenders could drop rocks, boiling water, or worse, onto anyone below. Gatehouses evolved over time. Early designs were simple arches, but by the high Middle Ages, they were architectural beasts. Take the barbican, for example, an outer extension of the gatehouse that forced attackers into a narrow, winding path, exposed to fire from all sides. Inside, you might face multiple portcullises, iron grills that could drop in sequence, trapping invaders in a deadly kill zone. The human element here was intense. Defenders manned the gatehouse around the clock, ready to repel assaults with everything from crossbows to cauldrons of hot sand. For attackers, breaching the gatehouse was the ultimate prize, but it came at a brutal cost. Siege towers, battering rams, and even tunneling were all fair game. Yet the gatehouse stood as a stubborn choke point, often deciding the fate of the entire siege. Connecting the pieces, moats, drawbridges, and gatehouses weren't standalone features. They were a symphony of defenses, each amplifying the other's strengths. The moat slowed you down, the drawbridge cut you off, and the gatehouse finished you off. Together, they turned the castle's perimeter into a gauntlet that few could survive. But what about the people behind these defenses? How did they live, fight, and endure a siege? As we shift gears, imagine yourself slipping through the gatehouse, past the creaking drawbridge, and into the heart of the castle. The walls still loom overhead, but now you're inside, where life and survival takes on a whole new meaning. Get ready to explore the inner workings of the castle in the next section, where we'll uncover the daily grind of its inhabitants and the strategies that kept them alive against all odds. The scale of it all. Before we move on, let's pause to marvel at the effort behind these defenses. Digging a moat took months, even years, with teams of workers hauling earth and redirecting water. Building a gatehouse required skilled masons, carpenters, and engineers, all working under the watchful eye of a lord who spared no expense. These weren't just structures. They were monuments to resilience, built to outlast the chaos of their time. Yet for all their grandeur, these defenses had their limits. A clever enemy could drain a moat, sabotage a drawbridge, or bombard a gatehouse into rubble. It was a constant game of innovation, with attackers and defenders racing to outsmart each other. And that's the thread we'll pick up next: the ingenuity and desperation of siege warfare, where every stone and plank played a role in the struggle for survival. You thought the walls were impressive. Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive into the world of moats and drawbridges, where water and wood conspired to make life a living nightmare for anyone with siege on their mind. Picture this: you've somehow made it past the archers, dodged the boiling oil, and now you're staring at a wide, murky stretch of water that circles the castle like a sleepy dragon guarding its hoard. The moat. It's not just a pretty pond for ducks, it's a calculated barrier designed to stop you dead in your tracks. And trust me, crossing it is about as fun as trying to swim through a swamp with your armor on. Spoiler, you probably won't make it. Moats were the unsung heroes of castle defenses, and they came in all shapes and sizes. Some were dry ditches deep and steep, lined with sharpened stakes that grinned up at you like a mouthful of bad decisions. Others were filled with water, sometimes shallow enough to wade through if you didn't mind the leeches, but often deep enough to swallow a fully armored knight whole. And let's not forget the rumors. Crocodiles. Maybe in a few exotic locales, but more likely it was eels or pike with a taste for trouble. The point wasn't just to make you wet and miserable. It was to slow you down, to turn you into a sitting duck for the defenders perched high above arrows notched and ready. Every second you spent fumbling in that water was another second they had to pick you off like a carnival game. So how did these watery traps come to be? Let's wade a little deeper into their design. Moats weren't just random holes in the ground. They were feats of medieval engineering, often tied to the landscape itself. Many were linked to nearby rivers or lakes, ensuring a steady supply of water or mud depending on the season. Some castles even boasted multiple moats, like a Russian nesting doll of despair. The Tower of London, for instance, had its moat fed by the River Thames, turning it into a stinking, sluggish moat-sewer combo that was as much a health hazard as a defense. Meanwhile, Château de Chambord in France used its moat to mirror its lavish architecture, proving that even a ditch could be fancy. These weren't just barriers. They were declarations carved into the earth. But moats weren't only about drowning your hopes. They were about making you an easy target. Imagine you're an attacker bogged down in chest-deep water or scrambling over a dry moat's jagged stakes. You're moving at a snail's pace, your shield's useless against the rain of arrows from above, and your mates are dropping like flies. That the genius of it, moats didn't just block you. They exposed you. They forced armies to rethink their plans, maybe lugging ladders or makeshift bridges, all while the castle's defenders sipped mead and took pot shots. It was medieval crowd control, and it worked like a charm. Now that you're stuck on the wrong side, let's talk about the only way across. Enter the drawbridge, half gateway, half taunt. This wasn't some flimsy plank, it was a hulking slab of timber, often reinforced with iron, that could be yanked up faster than you could say charge. Picture the mechanics' massive chains clanking through pulleys, counterweights dropping with a thud, and the whole thing groaning as it rose. It was like the castle's own garage door, except instead of keeping out nosy neighbors, it was slamming the brakes on entire armies. 1 minute, you're sprinting toward victory. The next, you're staring at a wall of wood and a moat that's suddenly your only company. And the drawbridge didn't just block, it messed with your head. Imagine leading your troops, adrenaline pumping, only to hear that creak and see the bridge lift just out of reach. Your whole plan unravels in seconds. You're left shouting orders to a panicked crew, all while the castle folk jeer from the ramparts. Sometimes drawbridges were even built to collapse under too much weight, a medieval trap card that sends you splashing into the moat's murky embrace. It wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a morale crusher, a loud and clear, not today, from the castle to you. Feeling discouraged, yet let's lighten the mood with some moat trivia. Beyond defense, moats had their quirks. Some doubled as fish ponds. Think of it, attackers starving outside while the castle dines on fresh carp. Others powered water mills or less glamorously served as sewage dumps. The smell alone could have been a weapon. There's even a tale from Bodiam Castle in England, where the moat's carp were so plentiful they became a local legend. Not every moat was a death trap, some were just really inconvenient swimming pools. But why all the fuss over a ditch? Historians still bicker about that. Were moats pure defense, or were they medieval flexes? Digging one took serious coin and manpower, so some argue they were status symbols as much as barriers. Look at me, a lord might say. I've got a private lake and an army. Others point out that by the time cannons rolled in, moats were less practical, more of a nostalgic nod to the good old days of knightly warfare. Either way, they left attackers soaked broke or both. Survived the moat and dodged the drawbridge don't celebrate yet, because even if you made it across, you'd still face the gatehouse, a hulking beast of stone and steel that's anything but welcoming. Picture it as the castle's bouncer, ready to squash your dreams of conquest. How do you get past that? Well, that's the next chapter, and trust me, it's a doozy. For now, marvel at the moat and drawbridge combo, nature and engineering teaming up to say, nice try, but you're not. You've made it across the moat, somehow dodged the arrows, and now you're staring at the castle's front door. But don't get cocky. This isn't some flimsy wooden gate you can kick down. This is the gatehouse, and it's about to make you regret every life choice that led you here. Picture it, a hulking mass of stone flanked by towers that seem to scrape the sky, with a narrow passage that beckons like a dare. It's the castle's main entrance, sure, but it's also its most vulnerable spot. So naturally, it's packed with enough tricks to make even the boldest attackers second-guess their career path. Gatehouses weren't just doorways. They were gauntlets designed to chew up and spit out anyone foolish enough to try forcing their way in. Think of them as the castle's bouncer, deciding who gets in and who gets bounced hard. And trust me, this bouncer doesn't care about your ego or your army's size. It's got one job: keep the riffraff out. So as you stand there catching your breath, let's peel back the layers of this medieval security system and see why it was the ultimate nope to anyone with siege on their mind. First things first, what exactly is a gatehouse? At its core, it's a fortified structure built around the castle's entrance, usually consisting of one or two towers flanking a central passage. But calling it just a fortified doorway is like calling a dragon a lizard. It's technically true, but it misses the point. Gatehouses were architectural beasts bristling with defenses that turned a simple entry point into a death trap. Early versions were basic, maybe a wooden gate with a tower or two, but as warfare got nastier, so did the gatehouses. By the High Middle Ages, they were stone juggernauts, complete with multiple barriers, hidden kill zones, and enough arrow slits to make a pincushion jealous. So now that you've got the gist, let's get you moving. Imagine you're an attacker, adrenaline pumping, leading your crew toward the gate. The drawbridge is down, lucky you, but as you step onto it, you hear the creak of chains. Suddenly, the bridge jerks upward, and you're left staring at a sheer wall. Too slow. Even if you make it across, you're funneled into that narrow passage walls, closing in with the portcullis, a massive iron grill, looming ahead. It drops with a clang, trapping you like a rat in a cage. And that's when the real fun begins. Curious about what's waiting inside stick-around things are about to get messy. Portcullises were the gatehouse's first line of defense. These weren't your average gates. They were heavy spiked and could be dropped in seconds to seal the passage. Some gatehouses had not one but two, or even three portcullises, creating a series of barriers that attackers had to breach one by one. Imagine hacking through the first only to find another grinning down at you. It was like trying to break into a vault, except the vault fights back. And if you thought that was bad, wait until you look up. That's when you notice the murder-hole-a-small openings in the ceiling of the passage. Defenders could drop all sorts of nastiness through them: rocks, boiling water, hot sand, or even flaming oil if they were feeling extra spicy. Picture yourself crammed in that tunnel, shoulder to shoulder, with your mates, when suddenly the sky starts raining pain. There's nowhere to run, no cover to hide behind. It's a kill zone, pure and simple, and you're the target. But the gatehouse wasn't done with you yet. Flanking the passage were arrow slits, narrow openings that let defenders fire arrows or crossbow bolts with near impunity. These slits were designed to give archers a wide field of fire while keeping them safe behind thick stone. You, on the other hand, are stuck in the open trying to dodge projectiles coming from angles you can't even see. It's like playing a deadly game of whack-a-mole, except you're the mole and the hammer is very, very real. Feeling trapped, yet good, because that's exactly what the gatehouse was built for. But it wasn't just a mindless killing machine. There were people behind it pulling the strings. Let's shift gears and meet the crew who kept this beast running and see how they turned a pile of stone into a living nightmare for attackers like you. And let's not forget the human element. Gatehouses were manned by guards who lived and breathed this stuff. They controlled access, raised alarms, and coordinated the defenses like a well-oiled machine. Some even had small rooms or chambers built into the towers where soldiers could rest, eat, or plot their next move. It was a mini fortress within the fortress, a nerve center where the castle's survival often hung in the balance. Bet they had a tally board up there keeping score of how many invaders they'd turned into pincushions before lunch. Now you might be wondering, how did gatehouses evolve over time? Well, like everything in medieval warfare, they had to keep up with the times. Early gatehouses were simple affairs, just a gate and maybe a tower. But as siege tactics got more sophisticated, so did the defenses. Enter the barbican, an outer extension of the gatehouse that forced attackers into a winding path, exposed to fire from all sides. It was like adding an extra layer of nope to an already formidable setup. Castles like Carefully in Wales took it to the next level, with gatehouses so complex they were practically castles unto themselves. Ready for some name-dropping? Let's check out a couple of gatehouses that made history and made attackers wish they'd stayed home. These bad boys didn't just defend. They bragged about it loud and proud. Speaking of famous examples, let's give a shout-out to the Tower of London's gatehouse. It's a beast with multiple portcullises, murder holes, and even a moat to boot. Or take Crac des Chevaliers in Syria, a crusader castle with a gatehouse that's a masterclass in defensive design layer upon layer of stone, each one a new nightmare for attackers. These weren't just buildings. They were statements loud and clear, "You shall not pass." But beyond the bricks and mortar gatehouses had a psychological edge. They were often the most imposing part of the castle, designed to intimidate anyone who dared approach. Picture the towering stone, the narrow slits like unblinking eyes, the portcullis like a snarling mouth. It was a visual flex, a way for the Lord to say, I've got the cash and the clout to build this, so don't even think about it. And honestly, it worked. Many sieges ended before they began, simply because the attackers took one look at the gatehouse and thought, yeah, maybe not. Mind blown. Yet hang on, because there's more to unpack, some quirky secrets, and a big question that still got historians arguing. Let's dig into the weird and the what-ifs that make gatehouses more than just stone and steel. Now here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some gatehouses had hidden rooms or escape tunnels. Imagine the Lord slipping away through a secret passage while the attackers are busy bashing their heads against the portcullis. It's like the medieval version of a backdoor exit, perfect for when things get too hot. And speaking of heat, there's an ongoing debate among historians: were gatehouses purely practical, or were they also about prestige? Some argue they were essential for survival, while others say they were as much about showing off as they were about defense. After all, building a gatehouse was expensive. Why not make it a monument to your power while you're at it? So what's the takeaway here? Gatehouses were the castle's front door, but they were also its deadliest trap. They combined brute strength with cunning design, turning a simple entrance into a gauntlet that few could survive. And as you stand there, imaginary or not, staring up at those towering walls, you can't help but feel a mix of awe and dread. This was medieval engineering at its finest and its most brutal. Survived the gatehouse. Barely well, don't relax just yet. You've only breached the first hurdle, and beyond that looming passage lies the real heart of the castle. The courtyard, the keep the place where power lives and battles are won or lost. Take a deep breath, because we're heading inside next, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's waiting. You've been standing atop the Tower King of all. You survey the medieval world sprawling out beneath you like a map come to life. The winds tugging at your cloak, and for a moment you feel invincible. But it's time to come back, down carefully, mind you, because those spiral stairs are no joke. As your boots hit the stone of the courtyard again, you notice something new. The walls aren't just walls. They're crowned with jagged edges like the castle's baring its teeth at the world. These are the battlements and crenellations, and they're about to show you how defenders could strike vanish and live to fight another day. The jagged edge of survival battlements were the castle's first handshake with danger. Except this handshake came with a fistful of arrows. Picture yourself crouching behind one, now peering through the gap between two stone teeth. Those gaps, they're called crenels, and the solid bits are merlins. Together, they form the crenellation, a design so simple yet so brilliant it's been around since ancient times. The idea was straightforward: hide behind the merlin. When the enemy shoots, then pop out through the crenel to return the favor. It's like a deadly game of peekaboo, and you'd better be quick. These features weren't just decorative. They turned the castle's walls into a fighting platform. Archers could line up along the battlements, protected by the merlins, and unleash a hail of arrows on anyone dumb enough to charge. And it wasn't just arrows. Sometimes it was stones, boiling water, or whatever else the defenders could hurl. Imagine being an attacker, looking up at that jagged skyline, knowing every gap could spit death. It'd make you rethink your life choices pretty fast. But here's the kicker: battlements weren't static. Some castles had wooden hoardings. Think of them as medieval balconies jutting out from the walls. These let defenders lean over and drop nasty surprises right on the heads of attackers at the base. Picture it: you're trying to ram the gate, and suddenly a cauldron of hot sand comes pouring down. Not a great day to forget your helmet. Let's pause here and catch our breath, because you're still in the thick of it. You've seen how the battlements gave defenders the upper hand, but there's more to this story. The towers you just left didn't stand alone, they worked in tandem with these walls, creating a deadly combo. As you glance back up at those looming sentinels, you realize they're linked by the battlements, forming a network of death-dealing vantage points, ready to explore how it all ties together. Let's walk the walls and find out. The Wall Tower Tag Team. Towers and battlements were like the medieval version of a buddy cop movie. One's got the height, the other's got the reach. The towers gave you the long-range view and a perch for sniping, while the battlements let you cover the walls in between. Together, they made sure no inch of the castle's perimeter went unwatched. If an enemy got past the outer defenses, they'd still have to deal with this double whammy. Walk along the wall with me now. You're stepping on a narrow path. Behind the battlements, the drop to the courtyard on one side, the outside world on the other. Every few steps, there's a tower rising up its base, blending seamlessly into the wall. From here, defenders could coordinate shouting orders, passing weapons, or just cursing the enemy's bad timing. The towers acted as hubs, while the battlements were the arteries keeping the castle's defense alive and kicking. And let's talk about those arrow slits again. You saw them in the towers, but they're here too, cut into the merlons. Narrow, vertical, and mean-looking, they let archers shoot without exposing themselves. It was like having a sniper nest every few feet. Some castles even had fancy versions, cross-shaped slits for crossbows, giving you a wider range of fire. Precision and protection all in one. You're getting the hang of this, now feeling the rhythm of the castle's defenses. But don't get too comfortable. There's more to uncover. The battlements weren't just about fighting. They were about enduring. Sieges could last months, and these walls had to hold up. So what kept them standing? And what tricks did defenders pull to outlast the enemy? Let's duck behind a merlon and dig into the gritty details. Holding the line-building battlements was no picnic. Those merlons and crenels had to be sturdy enough to take a beating catapult, stones, battering rams, you name it. Masons crafted them from the same tough stone as the towers, stacking them with precision to withstand both weather and war. And maintenance constant. A cracked merlon was an invitation to disaster, so someone was always up here patching things up even under fire. But it wasn't just about the stone, it was about the people. Defenders lived on these walls during a siege, eating, sleeping, and fighting in shifts. They'd rig up temporary shelters, hoard supplies, and keep the braziers burning to stay warm. Imagine the scene, torchlight, flickering across the battlements, the clatter of armor, and the distant thud of a trebuchet. It was grim, but it worked. Castles like Crac de Chevalier held out for years thanks to these stubborn walls. And here's a fun twist: some battlements had machicolation stone overhangs with holes in the floor. Defenders could drop rocks or burning pitch straight through, turning the base of the wall into a kill zone. It was brutal effective, and probably a little satisfying if you were having a bad day. You're still with me, crouched behind this merlon, the castle humming with life and death around you. The towers and battlements have shown you their power, their grit, and their secrets. But there's one more layer to peel back: the human cost. Who manned these walls, and what did it take to keep them going? We're about to meet the unsung heroes of the castle, the guards, the archers, the everyday folks who made this machine run. Stick around. Their stories next. The human heart of the stone. The real magic of towers and battlements wasn't the stone. It was the people who brought them to life. Picture the guards pacing these walls, eyes bleary from lack of sleep, scanning the horizon for trouble. Or the archers, fingers raw from drawing bows, waiting for the signal to loose. These weren't just soldiers. They were the castle's pulse, keeping it beating through the chaos. Life up here was tough. You'd be exposed to wind rain and enemy fire with only a merlin between you and an arrow. Food was rationed. Water was precious, and morale, that was the real battle. Yet these folks stuck it out, driven by loyalty, fear, or just plain stubbornness. They were the eyes in the sky and the hands on the bow. And without them, the castle was just a pile of rocks. So here you are, back where we started standing in the shadow of the towers, the battlements stretching out like a stone spine. You've seen the height, felt the fight, and met the souls who held it all together. But the castle's still got more to whisper in your ear. Next, we'll slip inside past the walls and into the halls where the lords and ladies played their own games of power. Trust me, it's a whole new battlefield. See, you there, you've clambered up from the towers, your legs still tingling from the climb, and now you're standing on the castle's ramparts. The wind's sharper up here, tugging at your cloak as you take in the view, the moat glinting below the countryside, rolling out like a patchwork quilt. But it's the wall beneath your boots that grabs your attention now. It's not just a wall, it's crowned with stone teeth, a jagged line of blocks and gaps that stretch around the castle like a predator's grin. Welcome to the battlements, my friend. This is where the defenders turned a pile of rocks into a fighting machine, and you're about to see how. The look of lethality. Imagine this. You're perched up here, hands brushing the rough stone, and all around you are these alternating high and low sections. The high bits, called merlins, stand like silent guards, while the gaps between them crenels let you peek at the world below. Together, they're the battlements, and their silhouette is pure medieval swagger. It's not just about looking tough, though. Those merlins were your shields soaking up enemy arrows so you didn't have to. Step into a crenel, and you've got a perfect shot at anyone dumb enough to charge the walls. It's simple, elegant, and oh so effective. But battlements weren't just for show-offs with bows. They doubled as walkways, letting guards stroll the walls, keeping an eye out for trouble. Picture yourself pacing this path. The stone cold underfoot, the distant clatter of the bailey below, mixing with the winds, low, moan. It's a lonely gig, but someone's got to do it. And up here, you're the first line of defense. You're getting the hang of this errant you. The battlements are starting to feel like Homewell, a drafty, arrow-riddled home. But there's more to these stone teeth than meets the eye. They came in all shapes and sizes, with some nasty surprises baked in. Ready to see what made them tick? Let's dive into the details. Designs with a deadly twist. Not all battlements were created equal. Some castles kept it basic plain, rectangular merlins, no frills, just solid stone. Others got creative. In Italy, you'd spot swallowtail merlins, their tops split like a bird's tail, while German fortresses might flaunt fishtail designs, all curves and attitude. These weren't just for looks. Those odd shapes could throw off an attacker's ladder or grappling hook, making life that much harder for the poor sods below. And then there were the upgrades. Some merlins had machicolations, fancy holes in the floor, where you could drop rocks, boiling oil, or whatever else you had handy on climbers. Picture the scene: you're leaning over, tipping a cauldron of hot pitch and watching it splatter on some unlucky night. Brutal, sure, effective. You bet. Other castles added wooden hoardings, temporary overhangs that jutted out, giving you extra room to rain down chaos. They were like medieval pop-up shops, only instead of trinkets they served up pain. You can almost smell the smoke now, can't you? The battlements are shaping up to be more than just a pretty edge. They're a full-on war zone. But it wasn't all about the gadgets. It was the people up here sweating and swearing who made it work. Want to meet them? Let's step into their boots for a bit. Life behind the Merlins. Defending a castle wasn't a solo gig. Up on the battlements, you'd be shoulder to shoulder with archers' lookouts and grizzled veterans all working the walls like a well-oiled machine. During a siege, you'd take turns. 1 minute you're firing arrows, the next you're ducking behind a Merlin, trying to catch your breath, while the enemy hurls insults and projectiles. The air's thick with the twang of bowstrings, the clatter of stone, and maybe the faint whiff of someone's lunch burning in the chaos. Guards lived up here too, pacing the battlements in peacetime, their boots wearing grooves in the stone. They'd huddle against the Merlins for shelter, maybe sneak a sip of ale when the captain wasn't looking. And when the walls took a hit, say, from a catapult's lucky shot, masons would scramble up patching cracks under a hail of arrows. It was gritty, unglamorous work, but it kept the castle standing. You're part of the crew, now feeling the weight of it all. But here's the thing, some folks still argue about whether these battlements were as good as they looked. Did they really hold the line? Or was it all a big stone bluff? Let's duck back into cover and unpack the debate. Were they really that great? Historians love a good scrap, and battlements give them plenty to chew on. On one side, they're a no-brainer. Thick Merlins, stopped arrows, cold letting you fight without turning into a pincushion. But against heavy hitters like trebuchets, which could lob boulders over the walls, or cannons that blasted through stone, they weren't so hot. A smashed Merlin could bury you in rubble, and suddenly your safe spot's a death trap. Then there's the mind game angle. Some say the real trick was the vibe-thos towering toothy walls screaming, "Don't even try it." Plenty of attackers took one look and decided sieges were overrated. When gunpowder rolled in, though the game changed, battlements couldn't keep up with cannons, so castles traded them for lower, tougher defenses. Still, their legend stuck around, even if it was more nostalgia than necessity. You've got the pros and cons now, but let's make it real. Imagine you're up here, in the thick of it, with enemies at the gates. The battlements are your lifeline. How do they hold up? Let's jump into the fray and find out. A siege in your shoes. It's dusk and the enemy's been at it all day. Ladders banging against the walls, arrows zipping past. You're crouched behind a Merlin, the stone cool against your back, heart hammering as you wait for your moment. A shout goes up, and you swing into the cradle bow ready. Below some fools climbing shield raised. You let fly watch him tumble, then duck as a volley rattles the wall. It's a brutal dance hide strike repeat, and these battlements are your stage. The noise is everywhere, shouts thuds the crack of splitting wood. You're alive, thanks to this jagged line of stone, and for a second you feel invincible. That's the magic of the battlements, practical sure, but with a touch of medieval drama. You've survived the siege, at least in your head. The battlements have shown their stuff, from clever designs to raw grit. But the castle's got more up its sleeves, sneakier, deadlier tricks tucked away in the walls, ready to trade the wind-whipped ramparts for the shadowy guts of the fortress arrow slits, and murder holes are calling, and they're as nasty as they sound. Let's go. You've dodged the moat's slimy embrace, slipped past the gatehouse's iron jaws, and now you're staring up at the castle wall stall, silent and smug. You might think you've got this siege in the bag, but hold your horses. These walls have a few tricks up their stony sleeves, arrow slits, and murder holes. These weren't just fancy design choices. They were the medieval equivalent of a no trespassing sign with teeth. So cozy up, and let's peek through the slits and holes that made castles the ultimate home security system. The archer's secret window. Picture yourself as a castle defender tucked into a chilly nook behind the wall. You're gripping a bow, and in front of you is a skinny little opening and arrow slit. It's your window to the world, except this window doesn't let in the breeze. It lets out arrows. Through that narrow gap, you spy the enemy lumbering closer, shields up, ladders rattling totally oblivious to you. You're practically invisible, a shadow with a sharp stick ready to ruin their day. Arrow slits were genius. On the outside, they're just a sliver barely wide enough for a cat to squeeze through. But inside, they flare out, giving you room to swing your bow or crossbow around. You can aim left, right, even tilt down to pick off the guy banging on the gate. It's like playing a video game on easy mode, except your ammo's real, and the stakes are life or death. Imagine the moment your palms are sweaty, the bowstrings humming with tension, and you spot a target, a loudmouth in shiny armor yelling at his troops. You line up the shot, breathe out, and let fly. The arrow zips through the slit silent as a whisper and bammies down. Shouts erupt outside, but you're already reaching for another arrow grinning behind your stone shield. It's not a fair fight, and that's the point. Now that you're feeling like a medieval sharpshooter, let's zoom out a bit. Those arrow slits didn't stay the same forever. They got upgrades like a castle's version of a software update. Stick around to see how they evolved and why they kept attackers guessing. Slits with swagger. Back in the early days, arrow slits were basic, just tall straight cuts for longbowmen to fire through. Simple, effective, done. But as warfare got spicier, so did the slits. Along came the cross-shaped ones, perfect for crossbows. Those little horizontal arms let you tweak your aim, like adjusting the sights on a sniper rifle. Some even had round bits at the ends for extra flare fancy, right? Here's a cool tidbit later. Design slanted downward so you could nail attackers hugging the wall, thinking they'd outsmarted you. No such luck. Castles like Caernarfon in Wales stacked these slits in rows, turning the walls into a firing range. It was like the castle was saying, "Oh, you thought you'd get close cute." But it wasn't all high fives and victory dances. Those slits could be a pain. Your view was tiny, like watching a battle through a keyhole. Miss the big picture, and you're toast if the enemy fires back. A well-aimed arrow from outside could slip through and ruin your day. Still, the body count usually favored the castle crew. Numbers don't lie. You've peeked through the slit and felt the rush. But what's it like on the flip side, charging toward those walls with arrows raining down? Let's switch teams for a sec and feel the panic, because trust me, it gets worse from here. The attackers. Arrow shower. Now you're the invader boots, pounding the dirt shield up, adrenaline pumping. The castle's a gray giant ahead. And then whistle thunk arrows start flying. You can't even see where they're coming from, just those tiny slits mocking you. It's like the walls are alive, spitting death with every step you take. Your buddy next to you goes down an arrow in his leg, and you're wondering if you should have stayed home. It wasn't just the arrows. It was the mind game. You're out in the open, exposed, while the enemy's cozy behind stone. Those slits made every advance a gamble move forward get skewered. Stay put, get nowhere. And if you reached the wall, those sneaky downward slits meant you were still fair game. It was psychological warfare with a side of pointy sticks. You're probably sweating just thinking about it. But if you thought arrows were bad, wait till you hit the gatehouse. The castle's got another surprise up there, literally. Let's tiptoe under the murder holes and see what's cooking. Death from above. So you've dodged the arrows and made it to the gatehouse. The portcullis is slammed shut, but you're not giving up. You grab a ram, start swinging, and then drip splash. Crash stuff starts falling from the ceiling. You glance up, and there they are, murder holes. Little openings overhead, unloading a medieval welcome party rocks, boiling water, maybe even hot sand or sticky pitch that burns like the sun. These holes were the castle's trap card. Tucked into the ceilings of gateways or tight passages, they let defenders rain chaos on you. Picture it, you're crammed in with your crew nowhere to run, and suddenly its pandemonium screams steam the clang of rocks on armor. Some castles got creative, tossing down quicklime that blinded you, or water to snuff out your torches. It was a nightmare buffet, and you were the main course. You're wincing, aren't you? It's brutal stuff. But there's method to this madness. Murder holes were more than just a drop zone. Let's pull back the curtain and see how they work their dark magic. The mechanics of mayhem. Murder holes were all about placement. They'd cluster them over key spots, gateways, corridors, anywhere you'd be stuck like a fish in a barrel. Some were tiny, just big enough for a handful of stones. Others were wide enough for a full-on deluge. The defenders could pick their moment, dropping a single rock to spook you or unleashing a torrent to wipe out your squad. And get this, they weren't always lethal. Sometimes they'd pour water to kill fires you set against the gates, or drop taunts to mess with your head. Okay, maybe not taunts, but wouldn't that be hilarious? Nice try, loser plonk. Truth is, even the threat of murder holes could send you running. That's power without lifting a finger. You've survived the onslaught. Barely. But who's up there making it all happen? Let's climb the ladder and meet the folks behind the slits and holes, the unsung champs of castle defense. The wall's warriors. Manning an arrow slit wasn't glamorous. You'd be stuck in a cramped nook eyes, glued to that sliver of light waiting for trouble. Hours of nothing, then sudden chaos arrows flying orders, barking your heart racing. Up above the murder hole, crew had it rougher, lugging heavy buckets, dodging steam, praying they didn't slip. These were the grunts who kept the castle standing, and they earned every callus. So there you are, back in your comfy bed, the echoes of battle fading. Arrow slits and murder holes turned castles into fortresses of fear, picking off attackers with cold precision. But the story's not done. Next, we're heading to the keep, the heart of the castle, where the last stand waits. Got your courage ready? Let's find out what's behind those final walls. You've fought your way through the outer walls, dodged arrows at the gatehouse, and now you're standing in the courtyard, staring up at the keepa, hulking tower of stone that looks like it could glare back. This isn't just a building. It's the castle's soul, the final stronghold, where the Lord and his family lived, and where defenders made their last stand when everything else crumbled. The air's heavy with tension, the distant roar of battle dulled by walls thicker than a dragon's hide. You can smell the smoke, feel the grit underfoot. This is the keep, your sanctuary, your fortress. And if things go south, your last gasp. Let's step inside and see what makes it tick. The fortress within the fortress. Imagine a castle as a body. The outer walls are the skin, the moats, the sweat, and the keep. That's the heart-pumping defiance, even when the rest is battered. It's built to survive a siege, all on its own, self-sufficient and stubborn as a mule. Picture a towering mass of stone square around with walls so thick you'd need a catapult and a prayer to crack them. Windows are scarce, just skinny slits for archers, not for sightseeing. Getting in's no picnic either. The entrance is high off the ground, reached by a drawbridge or a staircase so narrow you're praying your armor doesn't snag. Inside, it's a world unto itself. There's a well for water storerooms stuffed with grain and salted meat, maybe even a tiny chapel for begging divine intervention. The Lord's family lives here in quarters that are fancy by medieval standards. Think wooden beds and woven tapestries, though the chill still seeps through. Downstairs, the great halls, the hub, a cavernous room with a massive fireplace where the Lord holds court nights, swap war stories, and everyone pretends the stew doesn't taste like boot leather. You're starting to feel the keep's pulse now, aren't you? It's more than just a pile of rock sets, a legend carved in stone. Let's wander through history and check out some keeps that stood tall when the going got tough, each one a story of grit and glory. Legends in stone. Take the White Tower at the Tower of London. Built by William the Conqueror way back in the 11th century, it's a brute force stories high walls, up to 15 feet thick, a Norman flex that's still standing strong. It's hosted king's prisoners and more drama than a medieval soap opera. Then there's the keep at Château de Coucy in France before it got blasted in World War I. It was a giant, a cylindrical monster that towered over the countryside like a stone titan. These weren't just buildings. They were power moves daring anyone to try their luck. Not all keeps were giants, though. Goodrich Castle in England has a smaller one, cozy by comparison, but it held its own against sieges like a scrappy underdog. Big or small, keeps were the castle's backbone. When the walls fell, they were the last word, the final, not yet in a losing fight. You've met the legends, but now it's personal. Picture yourself trapped inside during a siege, the enemy hammering at the gates. What's it like to hunker down in the keep knowing it's do or die? Let's slip into the defender's boots and live it, the siege within. You're inside the keep now, and it's a pressure cooker. The air's stale, thick with the tang of sweat and smoke. Food's down to hard bread and watery soup gourmet, dining medieval style. Every crash outside, every arrow thudding against the walls rattles your nerves. The stone's cold, the space is tight, and yet there's a strange comfort in it. This is your fortress, your last stand. You've got water weapons and a crew of grim-faced soldiers ready to fight to the end. The lord's up in the great hall, pacing like a caged wolf, shouting orders, while the servants scramble to keep the torches lit. Kids huddle in the corners, wide-eyed, as the adults try to look brave. It's a siege within a siege, hours stretch into days, and you're counting every creak, wondering if it's the enemy breaking through or just the wind. But you hold on, because that's what the keeps, for one last stubborn stand. You're knee-deep in the siege, now feeling the strain. But keeps have their quirks, toed corners, and funny flaws that make them more than just war machines. Let's poke around and see what's hiding in the shadows. The keep's quirky side, not everything's life or death. Some keeps had secret tunnels, handy for smuggling supplies or sneaking a breather from the chaos. Then there's the guardrabe, the medieval lua hole in the wall that dumped well everything straight outside. Siege hygiene at its finest. The lord's rooms might sport a tapestry or two, maybe a splash of paint, but it's still a stone box drafty damp and probably home to a dog or three sprawled by the fire. Cozy. Sure, if you like your coziness with a side of frostbite. And the Great Hall, it's grand, all right. But those high ceilings mean every shout echoes like a thunderclap. Privacy's a myth here, good luck, plotting in secret when your whisper bounces off the walls. Still, its home quirks and all. You've chuckled at the quirks, but the real test is looming. The keep's a fortress sure, but it's about to face its ultimate challenge, siege warfare. Buckle up, we're setting the scene for the next chapter. The final stand. When the outer defenses collapse, the keep's your curtain call. You retreat inside, bar the doors, and brace yourself. Those thick walls laugh at battering rams, the high entrance turns attackers into sitting ducks, and the arrow slits let you rain hell on anyone dumb enough to get close. It's a meat grinder, and you're holding the line. Castles like Kenilworth in England proved it, enduring sieges for months while the enemy tore their hair out. Sometimes you win, sometimes you don't, but the keep gives you a fighting chance. That's where the real drama kicks in, though, and it's a tale for next time. Siege warfare's a whole new beast, catapult starvation, and tricks dirtier than a moat in summer. Want to know how it all plays out? Stick around, because the keep's just the warm-up. There you are in the keep's shadow, its story ringing in your ears. You've walked its halls, felt its defiance, and peeked at its oddities. But the battle's far from over. Next, we're diving into the chaos of sieges, where the keep's strength meets its match. Grab a blanket. It's about to get wild. Imagine this. You're perched on a castle wall, gripping the cold stone as the air hums with tension. Suddenly, a deafening crack splits the silence. A trebuchet's arm snaps forward, flinging a boulder the size of a cart straight at you. The rock soars a shadowy streak against the dawn and smashes into the ramparts with a shudder you feel in your bones. Chips of stone, fly smoke curls upward, and somewhere below, a shout rings out. The siege has begun, and this castle, your last line of defense, is about to be tested like never before. What's a siege? Anyway, siege warfare isn't the glamorous charge you might picture from the movies. It's not all swords clashing and banners waving. It's a slow, relentless grind. Attackers didn't just want to bash down the door. They wanted to break your spirit, your walls, or your pantry, whichever gave out first. Picture yourself as the attacker for a sec. You've got an army camped outside, cutting off every road, river, and goat path leading to the castle. No food gets in, no help arrives. Then you roll out the big guns, literally. Trebuchets and catapults hurled stones to crack the walls, while battering rams pounded the gates like a medieval sledgehammer. Siege towers rolled up wobbly and creaking, letting soldiers climb right onto the battlements if they didn't get shot down first. And if you were really sneaky, you'd dig tunnels under the walls, hoping to collapse them or sneak inside. But the defenders? Oh, they had tricks too. Boiling oil rained down arrows, flew, and if you tried mining, they'd meet you underground with swords in the dark. It was a brutal tug of war, and time was the rope. So you're starting to feel the pressure, huh? The walls are trembling. The air's thick with dust and fear. Let's zoom out and see how this played out in the real world, because history's got some stories that'll make your jaw drop. Sieges that made history. Ever heard of the Siege of Antioch in 1098? The Crusaders sat outside that city for 8 grueling months, starving and sick, until they finally bribed a guard to let them in. Sneaky, but it worked. Then there's the Siege of Kenilworth in 1266, 6 months of defiance, even after the walls were rubble. The defenders only gave up when the Pope sent a stern letter. These sieges weren't quick knockouts. They were endurance tests that left everyone exhausted. Here's a fun one for you. During the Siege of Megalopolis in 318 BC, the attackers tried using elephants to smash the gates. Elephants, Imagine the chaos trumpeting beasts versus stone walls. Spoiler, it didn't end well for the elephants. And speaking of wild tactics, Greek fire was the medieval equivalent of a flamethrower, sticky, fiery, and terrifying. Its exact recipes a mystery, but it burned on water, making it a siege superstar. History's full of these quirky moments that prove sieges were anything but boring. You're probably wondering who had it worse, the attackers or the defenders. Well, that depends on one big question historians still argue over. Let's dive into the debate and find out what really broke a siege. Hunger or hammer? Picture yourself inside the castle. The granaries nearly empty, the wells running low, and every day feels like a year. Some scholars say that's how most sieges ended: starvation, forced surrender. It's not flashy, but it's effective. An army marches on its stomach, and so does a castle. Others argue it was all about the assault battering rams, latter's sheer brute force. Smash the walls, storm the gates, and it's game over. Take the siege of Chateau-Gaillard in 1204. King Philip II mixed it up, mining tunnels to weaken the walls, then hitting hard with an assault. The impregnable castle fell in months. So was it the empty bellies or the broken stones? Truth is, it varied. A castle with full stores could laugh off a siege for ages, but if the attackers brought enough muscle, they didn't need to wait. The debate rages on, and honestly, it's a bit like arguing whether pizza or tacos are better. Both can win depending on the day. You've survived the siege so far, nice work. But here's a secret: the castle didn't stand alone. The land around it was a player too, and it could turn the tide in ways you'd never expect. Ready to see how a hill or a swamp could save the day? Let's roll into the next part. The terrain takes the stage. Castles weren't just pretty buildings, they were built where the land could fight for them. A steep slope turned attackers into panting wrecks before they even swung a sword. A river forced them to slog through mud or crowd onto a bridge, easy pickings for your archers. Even the ground itself mattered. Soft soil bogged down siege engines, while solid rock laughed at tunneling attempts. The terrain was your silent partner, and the best lords knew how to dance with it. But that's a tale for the next section. For now, you've weathered the storm of siege warfare, felt the rumble of the trebuchets, and seen how castles held or fell. Take a breather, maybe grab a drink, and get ready to explore how the land shaped the fight. The castle's story isn't over, yet you've survived the siege, felt the rumble of the trebuchets, and seen how castles held or fell. But there's one silent partner in every castle's defense that we've yet to explore: the land itself. The hills, rivers, and rocky outcrops that cradled these stone giants could be just as formidable as any wall or moat. In this section, we'll climb the slopes, wade through the marshes, and see how terrain turned castles into legends. Because in the world of medieval warfare, location wasn't just everything, it was survival. The power of high ground. Picture yourself trudging up a steep hill, armor clanking, breath coming in gasps. Your legs burn, your heart pounds, and you haven't even reached the castle yet. That's the power of elevation. Castles perched on hills or cliffs had a natural advantage: gravity. Attackers had to fight uphill, tiring themselves out before the real battle began. Meanwhile, defenders could rain arrows, rocks, and even boiling oil down on them with ease. It was like trying to storm a fortress while climbing a ladder one wrong step, and you were done. Hills didn't just make life harder for the enemy. They gave defenders a bird's-eye view of the battlefield, spotting trouble miles away. But hills weren't the only natural allies castles had. Let's shift our gaze to the shimmering waters that often guarded these stone behemoths. Water as a wall. Water was another game changer. Castles built near rivers or lakes could use the water as a natural moat, making it tough for attackers to approach. Some even had their own docks, letting supplies slip in by boat during a siege's sneaky rite. And if you were really lucky, your castle might sit on an island, turning the entire body of water into a giant uncrossable barrier. Good luck swimming across in full armor, you'd sink faster than a lead balloon. Water didn't just block the way. It slowed enemies down, giving defenders time to rally or just enjoy the show as the invaders floundered. These natural barriers made some castles legends in their own right. Let's wander over to a few famous spots and see how their terrain told their tales. Famous castles and their landscapes. Take Edinburgh Castle, for instance. Perched atop an extinct volcano, it's a stone sentinel overlooking the city. Attackers would have to scale the sheer rock face before even dreaming of breaching the walls, a workout no one asked for. Then there's Mont Saint-Michel in France, a castle on an island that becomes a fortress of solitude at high tide. Timing your attack was crucial. Get it wrong, and you'd be stuck in the mud while the defenders laughed from their dry perch. Or how about Bodiam Castle in England? It's surrounded by a wide moat. But the real genius is the approach, a winding path that forces attackers to zigzag, exposing their unshielded sides to a hail of arrows. It's like a medieval video game level every turns a trap. With such daunting landscapes, attackers often found themselves in over their heads before the first arrow flew. But it wasn't just about looking taut. Terrain could grind an assault to a halt. Terrain as a trap. Difficult terrain wasn't just a physical barrier. It was a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to drag a battering ram through a dense forest or across a boggy marsh. Your siege engines get stuck, your horses slip, and your men are exhausted before they even see the castle walls. A steep ravine could bottleneck an army, turning a charging horde into a sitting duck. Meanwhile, the defenders are fresh rested and ready to pick you off one by one. The land didn't care who you were. It was an equal opportunity troublemaker. But the terrain didn't just sit there looking pretty. Oh no, defenders knew how to make it fight for them. Let's see how they turned nature into a weapon. Weaponizing the land. The land could be a canvas for chaos. Defenders might flood the fields around the castle, turning the approach into a swamp good luck, marching through that in chainmail. Or they could set fire to the underbrush, creating a wall of flame that make even the bravest knight rethink their life choices. Some castles, like those in mountainous regions, could trigger rock slides, sending boulders crashing down on invaders. The terrain was more than a shield. It was a partner in crime, helping defenders paint a picture of doom for anyone who dared approach. Speaking of daring, some castle builders got downright creative with their locations. Ready for a couple of wild ones? Quirky castles in curious places. Here's a fun one. Prijama Castle in Slovenia is built right into a cave mouth like something straight out of a fantasy novel. Attackers would be squinting up at the cliff, wondering where the front door even was. Talk about a hide-and-seek champion. Then there's Castello di Amorosa in California. Sure, it's a modern replica, not a medieval original, but it's perched on a hillside surrounded by vineyards. Not exactly a defensive terrain, but it's got charm and wine. Imagine an attacker stumbling through the grapes, too tipsy to swing a sword. It's a different kind of defense mechanism, and we're here for it. All this talk of terrain raises a big question: what really kept a castle standing? Let's peek into the history books for a scholarly squabble. The great debate terrain versus design. Historians still bicker over what mattered more, the castle's design or its location. Some swear a well-placed castle could shrug off any assault, even with shaky walls. Others argue that even the mightiest fortress would crumble if the terrain was a dud. Look at Masada in Israel fortress on a plateau with sheer cliffs. It held off the Romans for months despite being outnumbered. But the Romans built a massive ramp and eventually broke through. So was it the terrain or the design that gave out the debates a draw? Lords back then had to wrestle with this too, fortify a tricky spot, or build on flat land. Sometimes politics won out, plopping a castle on a trade route or a rival's doorstep terrain be darned. But a bad spot could doom even the toughest walls. Living in these wild places wasn't all glory, though. Let's step inside and see what daily life was like on these rugged landscapes. Life on the edge. A castle on a steep hill or ringed by water was a strategic dream, but it had its quirks. Supplies had to be hauled up those same slope shop you packed light. In winter, icy paths turned every trip into an adventure. Castles near water might flood, leaving the courtyard a muddy mess. And moats, let's just say, they weren't known for their fragrance. Still, a smelly moat beat an enemy army at your door any day. These spots shaped not just battles, but the lives of everyone inside, from the lord to the lowliest servant. Picture yourself in one of these castles for a moment. Let's take a virtual trip to a cliffside stunner. A view from the ramparts. Imagine standing on the ramparts of Dunatar Castle in Scotland. It's perched on a rocky promontory, the North Sea crashing below. The wind howls, the waves roar, and you feel like you're at the edge of the world. It's breathtaking, sure, but isolating too. No wonder these places were hard to conquer. Getting there was half the battle. The terrain didn't just protect. It inspired awe, whispering tales of resilience to anyone who'd listen. So as you gaze out from your imaginary hilltop, remember that every castle tells a story of its land. The slopes, the rivers, the cliffs, they're silent characters in the drama of medieval life. But even the best terrain couldn't stop time. Weapons got nastier, tactics got sharper, and castles had to keep up or fade away. In the next section, we'll step into the evolution of castle design, how these stone giants morphed into complex mazes to face new threats. It's a tale of ingenuity, desperation, and a dash of stubbornness. Grab a comfy spot, because you won't want to miss what's coming next. You've seen how castles started as simple wooden forts on hills and grew into massive stone giants bristling with walls, moats, and towers. But here's the thing, castles didn't just sit there looking pretty. As warfare got nastier and new weapons rolled in, these stone fortresses had to change or get smashed to bits. Let's dive into the wild world of castle evolution, where builders race to outsmart attackers and keep their strongholds standing tall. The gunpowder wake-up call. Imagine you're a medieval lord, sipping your mead, feeling invincible behind your towering walls. Then one day, a loud boom shakes the ground. It's the 15th century and gunpowder has arrived in Europe. Cannons' big, ugly metal tubes start spitting iron balls that can crack your walls like an egg. Suddenly, those high stone defenses you bragged about aren't so tough anymore. Attackers didn't need ladders or battering rams. They just needed a cannon and a good aim. Castle builders didn't just throw up their hands and surrender, though. They got to work. First, they made walls shorter and way thicker. Think of it like switching from a skinny shield to a chunky one. These new walls could take a cannonball hit and still stand strong. They also sloped the walls at an angle so shots would bounce off instead of blasting through. And then came the Star Fort, or Tres Italiani, a low sprawling design, with walls zigzagging like a giant stone star. It was weird looking, but brilliant. Every point of the star was a bastion sticking out to blast attackers from all sides, sneaking up on one of these good luck. So how did these changes hold up in real life? Let's hop around Europe and check out some castles that faced the cannon fire and lived to tell the tale. Castles that fought back. Picture deal. Castle in England built by Henry VIII. It's low and round like a tough little stone turtle. Its curved walls were made to shrug off cannonballs, and its squat shape kept it out of the line of fire. Over in Rome, the Castel Sant'Angelo started as a fancy tomb, but got a medieval makeover. Thick walls and bastions turned it into a cannon-proof fortress. And then there's Malta, where the fortifications stared down the Ottoman Empire's cannons in 1565 and said, "Not today." During the Great Siege, those walls took a pounding, but held firm thanks to smart design and a lot of grit. Not every castle could keep up, though. Some older ones with their thin, proud walls were left behind like rusty armor in a shiny new world. They either got rebuilt or turned into crumbling ruins, pretty to look at, but not much use against a cannon. Lords had to dig deep into their treasure chests to upgrade, and you can bet some wished they could just ask the attackers, "Can we skip the cannons this time? My gold's running low." You're probably wondering what other tricks these castles had up their stone sleeves. Let's zoom in on some of the clever tweaks that made them even tougher to crack. Sneaky defenses and smart designs. Beyond thick walls, castles got fancy. Ever hear of a concentric castle? It's like a fortress with backup plans, multiple walls, each taller than the one in front. So if attackers broke through the outer layer, defenders could rain arrows from above. Crac des Chevaliers in Syria was a champ at this, a castle so tough it laughed at sieges. Then there were machicolations holes in the battlements, where defenders could drop rocks or boiling water on anyone dumb enough to stand below. It was like a medieval shower, but way less fun. Towers got smarter too. They popped up at corners or along walls, perfect for enfilading fire, a fancy way of saying they could shoot sideways and catch attackers in a crossfire. And here's a big one: castles started fighting fire with fire. Gun ports, little windows for cannons were added so defenders could blast back. Oh, and let's not forget the secret passages. Some castles had hidden tunnels for sneaky escapes or surprise attacks. Imagine the enemy thinking they've won only for you to pop out behind them like a castle ninja. Cool, right? With all these upgrades, you might think castles were unbeatable, but not so fast. Historians still argue about it. Let's peek at the big debate. Did it really work? Here's where things get juicy. Some historians say these new designs made castles nearly impossible to conquer. Thick walls, star shapes, and cannon platforms turned them into medieval tanks, slow, steady, and scary. But others shake their heads and say, nope. They point to places like Constantinople, where even the mightiest walls fell to cannons in 1453. The question is, could any castle keep up with gunpowder forever? Or were they just delaying the inevitable? No one's got a final answer. It's like a history mystery that keeps experts chatting over their coffee. What we do know is these changes made life harder for attackers. Sieges took longer, cost more, and sometimes ended with the bad guys just giving up. That's a win in any lord's book. Now let's talk about the effort behind all this. Upgrading a castle wasn't cheap or easy. Think of it as the medieval version of a home renovation gone wild. The cost of staying tough. Building a castle was already a wallet buster, but adapting one to face cannons, that was next level pricey. Thicker walls needed mountains of stone armies of workers and time lots of it. Adding bastions or piling up earthworks could empty a lord's treasure chest faster than you can say siege. And finding engineers who knew how to pull it off. Good luck, they were rarer than a dragon's tooth. Lords had to juggle their gold, fix the castle, or feed the village. It was a tough call, and not everyone could keep up. But for those who did, it was worth it. A souped-up castle wasn't just a fortress, it was a flex, a big stone. Try me to anyone with a cannon and a grudge. And as well, see next time these castles weren't just about war. They were bustling homes too. So there you go, castles evolving, like champs dodging cannonballs and keeping their cool. From star forts to secret tunnels, they turned every threat into a chance to get smarter. But here's the fun part. Castles weren't just war machines. People lived in them, lords, ladies' knights, cooks, you name it. In our next section, we'll step inside those walls and explore life beyond the battles. What did they eat? Where did they sleep? And how did they survive without video games? Get ready. It's a whole new adventure waiting behind the battlements. Imagine waking up in a medieval castle. The first thing you notice is the chill oven in summer. Those thick stone walls cling to the nights, cold like a stubborn old dog with a bone. You pull your scratchy woolen blanket tighter, but it's no use. The faint clang of the blacksmith's hammer drifts through the narrow window, mingling with the smell of wood smoke and something savory bubbling in the kitchens. You're a young servant in this bustling fortress, and as the castle stirs to life, your day begins. Let's dive into what it's really like inside these towering stone giants beyond the battles and ballads. The castle comes alive. You stumble out of your tiny chamber in the servants' quarters, rubbing sleep from your eyes, and step into the courtyard. It's already a hive of noise and motion. To your left, the great hall's massive wooden doors yawn open, where servants bustle about, setting tables with bread, cheese, and pitchers of ale. That's where the lord and lady will breakfast soon. But right now, it's chaos. Think of it as the medieval version of a busy diner. To your right, the stables hum with the soft snorts of horses, and straight ahead, the keep looms tall and proud, a stone tower where the lord's family hides away in luxury. You've peeked inside once, delivering a message, and the sight of tapestries and a bed with actual curtains nearly made your jaw drop. It's a different world up there, but down here, you've got work to do. So the castle's awake, and it's buzzing like a beehive. Who's making all this happen? Let's meet the folks you'll bump into as you dash through your day. They're the heartbeat of this stony beast. The castle crew. First up there's Sir Geoffrey, the castle's oldest knight, hunched over his armor with a rag and a scowl. "Morning, lad," he grunts, barely glancing your way. You nod and scurry past. Knights are great with swords, less so with small talk. In the kitchen, cook reigns supreme, her face flushed from the oven's heat. "More firewood, you dawdler," she barks, and you grab a bundle. Quickless time you lagged, she flicked a wooden spoon at your head. Then there's the steward, always scribbling in his ledger, and the blacksmith, whose hammer never seems to stop. From the lords, squires to the scullery maids, everyone's got a job, and you're all part of this noisy, sweaty tapestry of castle life. You've met the gang, but what's it like to actually live here? Stick with me as we trail you through a day of chores, chatter, and maybe a stolen moment or two. A whirlwind of a day. Your morning kicks off with a banger, rather a clatter. After dodging cook's wrath, you're off to tend the lord's falcons, making sure their mews are clean, and their meat's fresh, those birds are pickier than the lady herself. Next, it's the stables, where you shovel muck and try not to gag. By noon, you're in the great hall pouring ale for knights who smell worse than the horses. Afternoons might mean running messages across the castle or helping the blacksmith's apprentice wrestle a red-hot horseshoe. It's nonstop, and by dusk your legs feel like jelly. Upstairs, the lord's plotting in the solar with maps and advisors, while the lady checks the pantry or stitches with her maids. Their days sound fancier, but they're still fretting over taxes or some pesky rival. No one escapes the castle grind entirely. Phew, that's a lot of hustle. But don't worry, life here isn't all sweat and sore feet. When the sun dips, the castle swaps toil for tunes. Let's peek at the fun stuff that lights up these old walls. Laughter and lutes. When work winds down, the great hall turns into a party zone. A minstrel strums his lute, belting out tales of daring knights and swooning maidens. Half the time you're not sure if he's making it up. The lord and his guests sprawl on cushions, sipping wine, and chucking scraps to the dogs, who look happier than anyone. On a good night, there's dancing squires twirl maids, and even cook might sway, if the ale's flowing. Feast days are the best banners. Flutter tables, sag under roast pheasant, and honeyed cakes, and jugglers toss flaming torches while you gape. Outside, the lord might lead a hunt, chasing deer with his hounds, or the ladies fly falcons in the fields. You've never tagged along, but the stories they bring back pure gold. It's not all songs and feasts, though. Living in a castle has its prickly bits, and they're not just the thorns in the rose garden. Let's lift the lid on the less glamorous side of fortress life. The rough stuff. Castle walls might keep out enemies, but they trap the cold like a miser hoarding coins. Winter's brutal. Your breath puffs in clouds and your toes go numb no matter how many socks you pile on. Food's hearty but dull pottage day after day, a mush of oats and peas with a rare bit of bacon if you're lucky. Privacy's a myth you bunk with a dozen other servants snoring and muttering through the night. Baths, maybe once a month if the stars align. And the guardrobe, that drafty hole in the wall they call a toilet, stinks worse than the pigsty. Superstitions keep you on edge too. Spill salt, and you're tossing it over your shoulder quick, lest bad luck sneaks in. It's a tough gig, but you roll with it. You've tasted the highs and lows of castle life now, from dawn's bustle to night's revelry. But every castle's got its own flavorsome hide secrets in their stones. Ready to explore a few famous ones and their wild tales? Let's wind down with a teaser. Shadows and secrets. As you flop onto your straw mattress, the fire's crackle and a far-off owl's hoot lull you towards sleep. Your castle's lively, sure, but others out there, they've got stories that make your hair stand on end. Some boast hidden passages where spies once crept, or trapdoors that swallowed intruders whole. Others whisper of ghosts like the knight who roams the ramparts moaning for his lost lady. You've never seen a specter here, but when the wind howls through the turrets, you wonder. Next time, well roam some of these legendary castles and dig into their mysteries. So tuck in. Let your eyes drift shut and dream of stone walls with secrets to spill. You're huddled inside the castle. Keep the air thick with dust and the sharp sting of gunpowder tickling your nose. Outside, the relentless boom of cannons rattles the walls, each thud sending a shiver through the ancient stone. This fortress, a towering giant that stood proud for centuries, suddenly feels like a shaky house of cards. You hear the defenders shouting, rushing to patch up the cracks, but there's a sinking feeling in your chest. The end is near, and you're right in the middle of it, the final days of the castle age. This isn't the kind of siege you've imagined before with knights climbing ladders or catapults lobbing stones. No, this is a whole new beast. Gunpowder, that strange smoky magic from far-off lands, has arrived in Europe, and it's brought friends cannons. These hulking machines spit iron balls that smash through walls like a hot knife through butter. The mighty defenses that shrugged off arrows and battering rams, they're no match for this. Castle builders are scratching their heads, muttering, well, now what? So they got to work, trying to outsmart this new enemy. Picture this walls growing thicker, some as wide as 20 feet, and squatting lower to dodge the cannonball's punch. They added bastions, those clever pointy bits sticking out from the walls, perfect for firing back or bouncing shots away. Some castles, like the legendary Crackle de Chevalier, doubled up with extra layers of stone, turning themselves into a maze of defenses. They even dug ditches and piled up earth to soften the blows. But here's the catch: it took piles of gold and years of sweat to make these changes, and not every lord could keep up. The cannons were winning, and the castles were starting to sweat. Even with all this tinkering, the truth was creeping in. Castles weren't the unbeatable forts they used to be. Slowly, their job changed. Instead of bristling with soldiers, they started dressing up. Fancy, think lush gardens, gilded halls, and cozy bedrooms fit for a king. Lords turned them into palaces to show off their wealth, like a medieval version of keeping up with the neighbors. Castles became less about war and more about wowing the crowd, a shiny badge of honor in a world that was shifting fast. What was making that world shift? Well, kings were getting bossier, gathering up big armies that answered only to them. No more little lords hiding behind their own walls. No, the king's troops had the job of keeping everyone safe. Castles started feeling less like fortresses and more like fancy homes where you tip your hat to the crown. It's almost like the castles were bowing out as the old ways of knights and fiefs faded into the sunset. The age of scattered power was giving way to something bigger, and the castles were along for the ride. Here's where it gets quirky. As cannons kept blasting, lots of castles got left behind. Some turned into jails, simaging the Tower of London, locking up folks like Anne Boleyn. Others became storage sheds or dusty offices. And a few, they just sat there falling apart until ivy climbed their walls and ghost stories started whispering through the cracks. Nowadays, you see their ruins all over Europe, looking dreamy and mysterious, like they're waiting for a knight or maybe a tourist to come along. But hang on, why did castles really fade away? Was it all those big bad cannons or something else? Historians love to argue about this over their tea. Some say it's the kings and their armies that made castles old news. Why build your own fort when the royal squad's got your back? They reckon castles were already on the way out before the gunpowder even showed up. But others shake their heads and point to the cannons, saying, nope, it's the tech. Those walls didn't stand a chance once the boom started. So, which came first, the changing world or the cannonballs? It's a puzzle that keeps the scholars buzzing, and you can almost hear the castles chuckling at the debate. As the dust settles on this chapter of our tale, the castles may be quiet, but they've still got secrets up their crumbling sleeves. Next time, we're off to visit some of the most famous fortresses in history, places where legends were born and mysteries still hide. Think hidden tunnels, epic battles, and maybe even a ghost or two. So, tuck in tight, and let's wander through these incredible strongholds together in our next adventure. You're crouched inside the castle, keep the air heavy with dust, and that sharp, acrid whiff of gunpowder stinging your nostrils. Outside, the earth shakes with the boom of cannons, each blast rattling the walls like a grumpy giant knocking to come in. This isn't your granddad's Siegano noble knights, scaling ladders or catapults flinging rocks. Nope, these are the big leagues now. The once mighty fortress around you, a stone behemoth that's laughed off arrows and battering rams for centuries, feels like it's trembling. You can almost hear it whisper, "I wasn't built for this." Welcome to the beginning of the end for castles. The culprit gunpowder. That sneaky, smoky invention slinked over from distant lands and brought its rowdy pals cannons. These beasts hurl iron balls that smash through walls like they're made of stale bread. Suddenly, those towering defenses that made invaders cry uncle don't look so tough. Castle lords are pacing, thinking, okay, time for a plan B. And plan B is a frantic scramble to keep up with the times, because no one wants their fancy fort turned into rubble by lunchtime. So what do? When cannons come knocking, you beef up. Walls get thicker, some balloon out to 20 feet wide and shorter, ducking low to dodge the cannonball's wrath. Clever folks add bastions, those sharp, pokey angles jutting out like a porcupine's quills, perfect for shooting back or deflecting shots. Take Crack de Chevalier, that Syrian superstar of castle sit, piles on extra stone layers like it's prepping for the fortress equivalent of a bodybuilding contest. Ditches get deeper. Earth gets heaped up as a cushion, anything to soften the blow. But here's the kicker. All this upgrading costs a king's ransom and takes forever. Meanwhile, the cannons are cackling, catch us if you can, and not every castle can keep pace. Even with these facelifts, the writing's on the wall literally, if the cannonball hits it. Castles aren't the invincible strongholds they once were. Their whole vibe shifts. Instead of bristling with sweaty soldiers, they start primping with fancy gardens, gilded ceilings, and beds so plush you'd never guess they once hosted sword fights. Lords turn them into palaces, less defend the realm, and more look at my shiny stuff. It's like the medieval version of a glow-up castles, trading their war boots for a velvet robe, strutting their stuff as symbols of power rather than shields against it. But why the career change? Well, the world's getting a makeover too. Kings are flexing their muscles, building big armies that answer only to them. No more patchwork of little lords holed up in their private forts. No, it's the king's crew calling the shots. Castles start feeling like yesterday's news, bowing to a new era where centralized power is the hot trend. It's almost poetic as the age of scattered knights and feudal squabbles fades. These stone giants trade their helmets for crowns, or at least a comfy seat at the royal table. And, oh, the quirky turns, some of them take with cannons, turning military castles into Swiss cheese, plenty get repurposed. The Tower of London swaps battlements for bars, locking up VIP prisoners, like Anne Boleyn talk about a downgrade. Others become glorified warehouses or sleepy government offices. A few just sit there crumbling into romantic ruins draped in ivy and ghost stories. Fast forward to today, and their postcard stars luring tourists with their brooding charm. Who knew a cannon could turn a fortress into a photo op? Now, let's stir the pot a bit. Why did castles really fade? Was it all those loud, rude cannons, or something sneakier? Historians love this debate. It's their version of a bar fight, minus the spilled ale. One camp says, it's the politics, dummy. Kings and their armies made castles redundant before gunpowder even lit the fuse. They argue the feudal system was already creaking and castles were just clinging to a dying dream. But the other side snorts, "Pfft, it's the tech. Cannons turned walls to dust end of story." So what's the real villain here? A shifting society or a big boom. The castles, silent as ever, aren't spilling the beans, but the argument's juicy enough to keep you wondering. As the smoke clears and the cannon echoes fade, these old stone hulks still have tales to tell. They're not done with us yet, not by a long shot. Next time, we're stepping inside some of history's most epic fortresses where legends were forged, battles raged, and maybe a ghost or two still rattles around. Hidden tunnels, wild fights, and secrets carved in stone await. So snuggle up, because our castle adventures about to get even wilder